The macabre history of the Ashworth family, the body merchants of eastern Kentucky. Section 1. You were never supposed to know this. What you're about to hear was meant to be buried, just like the hundreds of bodies it concerns. But some truths rot louder than silence, and this one refuses to stay dead. In the hills of eastern Kentucky, there is a place locals still call Death Valley. The maps don't label it. The tourist guides ignore it. But it's there, quiet, hollow, and watching. Beneath that overgrown patch of land, the soil is swollen with history. A history so grotesque, so calculated, that even the devil himself might turn away. In 1918, a rusted iron box was unearthed during routine construction. Inside, 17 leather-bound ledgers, aged, brittle, but intact. The pages? Catalogs of human remains. Meticulously documented transactions, names, weights, preservation notes. Over 600 bodies. Each page ended with the same phrase, coffin weighted appropriately. Family none the wiser. Some entries were marked with red crosses. Those were the ones still breathing when they were selected. This wasn't grave robbing. This was human harvesting, an enterprise orchestrated by three brothers who disguised themselves as the pillars of faith, family, and community. Undertaker Ezekiel Ashworth, carpenter Morai Ashworth, and preacher Zachariah Ashworth. Saints in the sunlight, merchants of the dead by candlelight. They built a cemetery. They held Sunday sermons. They comforted the grieving. And then they stole the bodies, sometimes before they were even corpses. Shipped across state lines to some of the most prestigious medical institutions in America, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston. These were not just crimes, they were partnerships. Silent alliances between death merchants and men in white coats who claimed to serve science but fed on secrecy. But here's what makes it truly horrifying. This wasn't madness. It was method. Cold, deliberate, and profitable. And it thrived because no one wanted to ask where the knowledge came from, or what price was paid for progress. You've heard whispers of corruption in high places. But what if I told you that the roots of that corruption are soaked in blood, and they stretch back centuries? That America's medical knowledge, the very foundation of modern science, was built, in part, on the bones of the forgotten? Keep listening, because the Ashworths are just the beginning. Absolutely. Here's your next descent into darkness. Section 2. They came to Ashworth Creek in the spring of 1784. Three strangers with no ties, no history, no questions. In a frontier settlement barely 50 families strong, new arrivals were rare and often met with suspicion. But not these men. No, these men were exactly what the town thought it needed. Ezekiel was the eldest. Stoic, tall, eyes like river stones, cold and still. He introduced himself as an undertaker from Philadelphia, experienced in the respectful preparation of the dead. Morai, the middle brother, was a carpenter, quiet and meticulous. He offered to build homes, furniture, coffins. And Zachariah was the golden one, a preacher with a velvet voice and scripture in his breath. Fresh from a Virginia seminary, rare education for a man in these woods. He said he came to shepherd lost souls. The truth was, he came to harvest them. They purchased 5 acres at the edge of the settlement and offered to build a chapel. The community, struggling with disease, wild accidents, and unmarked graves, welcomed them with open arms. Death Valley Cemetery was what Zachariah named it, quoting scripture, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." The locals nodded. Sounded holy. They didn't question why 3 unmarried brothers would settle on sacred ground. But this wasn't a mission. It was a machine. Within months, Ezekiel had established his mortuary just behind the chapel. A low, stone building with thick walls and few windows. Morai built his coffin workshop beside it, the smell of sawdust covering the scent of other things. And beneath it all, in a place no eyes would ever see, the trapdoor, the cellar, the room where the dead were prepared but not for burial. It began with the sick, the old, the forgotten. People died as they always had. But now the Ashworths handled the arrangements. Families saw the face, kissed the forehead, wept as the lid closed. They never noticed the weight was wrong. They never knew that their loved ones had been replaced with rocks and frozen earth. What the brothers buried was grief. What they kept was profit. They weren't just exploiting trust. They were perfecting it, weaponizing it, wrapping death in ritual so that no one would ever look closer. The town believed in them. They built the myth of goodness with every funeral. And all the while, they were becoming rich. But not loud rich, not flashy rich. They were quiet, patient, hidden, exactly like rot. Ready to go further into Section 3? Here we go. The descent deepens. Section 3. By the end of their first year, the Ashworth brothers had shipped 8 bodies to the East Coast. Each one delivered in secret crates, disguised as tool chests, transported by unsuspecting merchants who believed they were aiding a church mission. The crates never returned, but the money did. Ezekiel recorded every detail in his ledger. He wasn't a butcher, he was a bookkeeper of the damned. Entry number 3. Subject male, mid-40s, excellent condition. Death by accident. Requested by Dr. H., Pennsylvania College of Medicine. Payment $19. Condition. Ideal. It wasn't random. It was tailored. The brothers weren't just sending bodies, they were curating them. Broken bones, surgical scars, congenital deformities. Each trait made the corpse more valuable to the eager hands of medical professors hungry for flesh to carve, dissect, and display to their wide-eyed students. And none of them asked where the bodies came from. They didn't want to know. By 1787, the brothers had expanded their territory. 20 miles in every direction, they offered burial services. A gift, they said. No family would be denied the grace of a proper Christian funeral. But what they were really doing was growing their inventory. Zechariah began making trips to nearby settlements, offering sermons, visiting the sick, finding candidates. Ezekiel would follow with medical assistance. Always too late to save the soul, but just in time to preserve the flesh. And Morai, he refined the preservation process. Salt, alcohol, oils. The dead didn't rot. They traveled. The coffins back home? Still filled with weight. Still buried. Still blessed. The families cried. The town praised the Ashworths. And the ledgers grew thicker. They began using code. They called the bodies timber. Those with abnormalities were twisted grain. Women of childbearing age were fruiting stock. Children were saplings. And healthy, muscular men? Prime cuts. Each phrase stripped humanity away, until the corpses weren't people anymore. They were product. And here's the part you need to understand. This wasn't just about death. This was about control. The brothers weren't simply stealing bodies. They were rewriting the value of human life. Replacing soul with science. Grief with commerce. Faith with a transaction. No one stopped them. Why would they? They weren't monsters in the dark. They were the men who buried your father. They were the hands that held your grief. They were the mask behind which evil learned to smile. Would you like to keep going with Section 4? Absolutely. Prepare yourself for Section 4. This is where the mask begins to slip. Section 4. The year was 1791. The day everything changed. Up until then, the Ashworths had been opportunists. They waited for death to arrive on its own terms. But death, as they learned, is unpredictable, unreliable. And with medical schools offering double, sometimes triple, the payment for fresh specimens, patients became a liability. That's when the first one happened. He was a traveler. Young, strong, no family, just passing through. He took shelter from a storm in the chapel. Zechariah offered him food. Hospitality, he said. God's kindness. But what the traveler drank wasn't communion wine. It was a tincture, a chemical still in use today, refined in 18th century hospitals. Odorless, tasteless, quick. His lungs collapsed quietly. His heart slowed. By morning, he was on a table beneath the mortuary floor, draining into a basin. Ezekiel logged him as subject number 73. Male. Proximate. 30. Strong musculature. Visible surgical scarring. Administered mixture. Death rapid and calm. Premium expected. That night, the brothers drank whiskey by the fire. Not in celebration. Not in guilt. In agreement. The game had changed. From that point forward, death was no longer a visitor, it was a commodity. Controlled. Delivered on command. And the method? Flawless. Zachariah would find them. Men on the road, drifters, lonely widowers, rootless workers. He'd speak to them like a prophet, like a friend. Where are you headed, brother? Do you need rest? The Lord provides. And the Lord did provide 3 doses per week. Once the man was inside the house, the rest was formula. The wine, the prayer, the soft words as the man faded. And then, silence. Cold. Business. They didn't always kill. Sometimes they waited. Sometimes they followed their prey into nearby towns. But always they selected carefully based on medical demand. Medical schools wanted lungs with damage. They wanted children with deformities. They wanted women with uterine abnormalities. The Ashworths became suppliers in a bespoke trade. If science demanded it, they found it. Or made it. They didn't see themselves as murderers. They believed they were ascending. Doing what God could not. Creating order from chaos. Turning anonymous death into useful death. Into profit. Into power. And the town? Still blind. Still trusting. Still praising the preacher who buried their dead and fed their souls. No one ever asked what was beneath the ground. They should have asked. Because not everything buried stays silent. Shall I begin Section 5? Let's continue into the dark abyss. Section 5. It was a girl 8 years old named Clara Sutton. And her death nearly destroyed everything. She wasn't supposed to be chosen. Clara was the daughter of Thomas Sutton, a well-liked blacksmith in Ashworth Creek. Her family attended every sermon. Her mother had even sewn Zachariah's altar cloth. They trusted the Ashworths completely, which made Clara a miscalculation. She had fallen ill, fever, coughing blood, night sweats. Consumption, they said. The town expected her to die. Ezekiel noted her in the ledger 2 days before her death. Sapling. Severe degeneration. Likely pulmonary collapse. Send to Yale or King's College. But something went wrong. Clara didn't die fast enough. Her mother, desperate, came to the chapel for prayer. Zachariah laid hands on the girl's head, whispered healing scripture, and slipped a dose into her medicine. Clara died within the hour. The family grieved, but suspicion flickered. Her father had held her hand only minutes before and said she had seemed better. Too alert, too alive. The way she went still didn't make sense. They asked for the coffin to remain open through the night, for vigil. That was the problem. Morais stand-ins. His handcrafted wax duplicates, weighted with stones, dressed in real clothing and soaked with pine oil, weren't ready. He worked through the night, carving her face from memory. But when Thomas Sutton came to say goodbye at dawn, he noticed something. The hands. They were too stiff, too clean, too wrong. He screamed. Within hours, the coffin was unearthed. The wax effigy shattered in the sun. The body was gone. It was the first time someone in Ashworth Creek truly saw. And the town turned on itself. The Ashworths denied everything. Claimed grave robbery. Blamed outsiders. Called it the work of Satan. Zachariah even staged an exorcism, convulsing and wailing before the altar, demanding the Lord reveal the thieves who desecrated the innocent. But Thomas didn't believe him. Not anymore. And neither did 3 others. A midwife, a carpenter, and the schoolteacher. They began to ask questions. They began to dig. And what they found changed the town forever. Would you like to descend into Section 6? Brace yourself. Section 6 is the beginning of the unraveling. Section 6. 3 nights after Clara's coffin was found empty, the carpenter, Joel Whitmer, entered the chapel under moonlight. He brought no lantern, just a crowbar and his rage. The Ashworth Chapel was always quiet after dusk. Zachariah claimed it was a place held in sacred silence. But Joel had spent 2 decades building homes. He knew the sound of hollow floors. He found it behind the altar, beneath a trapdoor disguised beneath woven rugs and a false crossbeam. The scent hit him first, chemical, metallic, unnatural. The air was colder below, denser. He descended by instinct. What he found was a hidden corridor, narrow and damp, lit faintly by oil lamps. Lining the walls were coffins, real coffins, but they weren't buried. They were stacked, numbered, open, and inside them, bodies, naked, preserved, tagged. Every one of them labeled in Ezekiel's handwriting. Some were headless, some dismembered, some open down the center, stitched crudely shut. Men, women, and children, all missing from Ashworth Creek over the last 15 years. Joel ran, retching, weeping, swinging the crowbar at shadows. He didn't make it out. Zachariah was waiting above. Joel's body was found the next morning in the riverhead, caved in. The sheriff called it an accident, said he slipped. But those who had seen Joel that week knew the truth. He had found something that wasn't meant to be seen. The midwife disappeared 2 days later. The schoolteacher was committed to a sanitarium by week's end, rambling about stitched children and wooden angels with no eyes. The town went silent. Those who whispered were warned. Those who mourned were shamed. And those who knew simply vanished. The Ashworths tightened their grip. Sunday sermons turned into rituals. People weren't just listening to the word anymore. They were obeying it. They stopped asking questions. They stopped thinking. They handed over their dead. And eventually, they began handing over their living. There were rumors that families who owed debt would sacrifice a child, that barren women would offer neighbors infants, that the preacher's prayer had become a contract. It wasn't a church anymore. It was a machine, a factory of flesh, and business was booming. Are you ready to continue with Section 7? It only gets darker from here. You've made it this far into the heart of madness. Section 7 is where the Ashworths stop hiding. Section 7. By 1803, Ashworth Creek was no longer a town, it was a vessel. A quiet, obedient community wrapped around one pulsing truth, the Ashworths' own death. But it was no longer just about bodies. That was the old trade. Now it was about legacy. You see, Ezekiel had grown obsessed with permanence. He believed the soul left traces, residue in flesh, in bone, in blood. And with the right preservation methods, he could trap it, hold it, reanimate its essence under controlled conditions. It was no longer about studying the body. It was about using it. He called it the doctrine of residual spiritus. Morai, the eldest brother and silent architect, built devices to support it. Glass wombs, mercury-filled veins, copper wiring laid across spinal columns. A crude fusion of medicine and mysticism. They didn't just embalm bodies anymore. They wired them, programmed them, and in one horrifying experiment they spoke to one. It was subject number 317, a boy no older than 10, still intact, still warm. They claimed his fingers twitched. His eyes blinked, though the optic nerves were removed. His mouth opened and out came a name no one in the room recognized, except Zachariah. He turned white. The boy had whispered the name of Zachariah's mother, dead since 1764. That night, Zachariah preached with blood on his hands and fire in his voice. He declared a new era, the divine reconstruction. The townspeople were told, "We will conquer death itself. The Lord's true miracle will not be in heaven, but here in flesh, in sinew, in bone. Your children will not die. They will ascend." And the people believed him. They offered their children now, volunteered them, the sick, the crippled, the unwanted, all for the first resurrection. And when one girl, Emma Mayfield, was born with a twisted spine, her mother wept with joy. Not sorrow, joy, because Zachariah said her deformity was evidence of spiritual potential. Emma vanished at age 4. The mother baked pies for the funeral. The congregation applauded. Obedience was the new gospel. Those who doubted were exiled. Those who returned weren't the same. Their eyes didn't move right. Their voices dragged. Some swore they saw stitches along their necks. Others whispered that the dead had been reassigned, reborn to serve, not to rest. Shall we push deeper into Section 8? The truth beneath Ashworth Creek hasn't even begun to rot yet. Now we descend into the marrow of the horror. Section 8 exposes what even the Ashworths feared. Section 8. Behind the chapel. Deeper than the crypts, beyond even the resurrection room, lay a chamber no one in Ashworth Creek spoke about. Not even the Ashworths. It was called the garden. Not for plants, not for flowers, but for things that grew from flesh. The original blueprints came from Morai's journals, written in cipher, with ink made from lamb's blood and powdered calcium from skull fragments. Inside were sketches of human figures with twisted limbs, overlapping ribs, and backward jaws. He wasn't just studying death anymore. He was engineering life. When the family began receiving crates from Europe, marked with seals from abandoned Prussian medical schools and occult societies like Die Schwarz-Zunge, the experiments mutated. Inside the garden, suspended in tanks of tar-colored fluid, were hybrids. Children with glass eyes and breathing tubes. Women whose wombs had been fused with cattle organs. Heads with no mouths, just slits for sound. Morai believed he could erase weakness from the human design. No more sickness. No more death. No more soul. He called them ashlings, his offspring of perfected design. They weren't birthed. They were assembled. And they were awake. Some were docile, floating in tanks, twitching gently. Others clawed constantly, eyes wide, mouths foaming. One, a twin-faced infant with adult-sized lungs, sang in Latin through the night. The chamber was soundproofed with human fat. Only 3 people were allowed entry: Morai, Zachariah, and Ezekiel, who kept detailed records of each subject's failure condition. He transcribed it carefully. It read, "Bring me the first flesh, the one uncorrupted, the child of the ashes, and I shall wake." That's when they began hunting specific children. Not just the sick, not just the unwanted. They wanted perfect ones now. Pure, healthy, untouched. The Ashworth family chapel became a farm. And somewhere, beneath the garden, something waited. Ready for Section 9? You've seen the Ashworth secrets. Now comes the price. Here comes Section 9, where the twisted legacy demands its price, and the cost is more than blood. Section 9. The year was 1807 when whispers first became screams. Families began losing children, healthy, strong, vibrant souls, snatched in the dead of night. No one spoke openly, but every household in Ashworth Creek felt the invisible weight of disappearance. The price for the divine reconstruction was paid in flesh. But that wasn't the worst of it. The Ashworth's grip extended beyond the physical. The town was suffocating under a new kind of control, a psychological dominion that reached into dreams and fears. Zachariah, once a preacher of hope, transformed into a prophet of dread. His sermons darkened, laced with warnings of divine wrath for those who dared resist. His eyes, once warm, now burned with a fanatic light, as if possessed. Children who returned from the woods weren't the same. Some were mute. Others stammered tales of shadowy figures with silver hooks and cold, hollow eyes. Mothers wept silently, hiding these stories from the congregation, afraid of becoming targets themselves. The community's faith warped into obedience. Dissenters were labeled heretics, ostracized, or disappeared without trace. The Ashworths ensured loyalty with gifts and threats. Land, money, promises of spiritual salvation, or the cruel end for those who resisted. In the shadows, Ezekiel refined his embalming arts, making bodies last longer for the dark markets beyond Kentucky. His ledger grew thick with names, prices, and coded marks, a currency of death that enriched him beyond measure. Morai, the silent architect, plunged deeper into the occult sciences, believing that science and the supernatural were threads of the same fabric, and only through their union could humanity transcend. But the town's silence was fragile. One night, a visitor arrived, Dr. Thomas Bennett, a young physician from Philadelphia, suspicious and fearless. His questions cut through the thick veil of lies like a knife. He saw what the others missed, the unnatural stillness in the eyes of the townsfolk, the unspoken terror behind polite smiles. Bennett's curiosity was his downfall. Within months, the preacher's sermon ended in a sudden accident. Bennett's body was found in the creek, his skull fractured, ruled a tragic fall by the local magistrate, a man on the Ashworth payroll. But truth has a stubborn way of leaking. Halfway mark. If you feel the weight of this secret, comment below twice. Ashworth's shadow falls. This will mark you as one who sees beyond the veil and lock in your awakening. Shall we descend further into the abyss with Section 10? Here is Section 10. Peeling back the layers deeper, brace yourself. Section 10. With Dr. Bennett silenced, the Ashworths tightened their control, but cracks began to spread beneath their carefully constructed facade. The whispers of rebellion stirred in the shadows. A small group of townsfolk, those who had lost children, loved ones, or their own sanity, began to piece together the ghastly truth. The midwife who vanished had left behind journals, torn, stained, but legible, hidden inside her home. They spoke of strange midnight visits, unnatural sounds from the chapel's basement, and the eerie, unnatural calm that followed. These journals became a beacon, but seeking the truth was dangerous. One by one, those who dared to probe deeper vanished or were found dead in the woods, their bodies mutilated, staged as accidents or animal attacks. Fear gripped the community like a vice. Yet, the Ashworth's greatest weapon wasn't violence or deception. It was the institution of faith. Zachariah's sermons had transformed into psychological chains. His voice was a weapon, an unyielding force drilling obedience into every soul. He preached that those who questioned were agents of darkness, sowers of chaos meant to disrupt God's divine plan. The townspeople clung to his words like lifelines, drowning their suspicions in scripture and ritual. In this climate, even the brave hesitated. But there were those who fought quietly. A clandestine alliance formed: farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, those who refused to bury their doubts. They communicated in code, met in secret, and planned. They knew the Ashworth's operation was bigger than the cemetery, bigger than Ashworth Creek. They had connections: professors, doctors, politicians, spanning states, all entwined in this grotesque web. Breaking it would require more than courage. It would demand sacrifice. The resistance realized they needed proof, undeniable evidence of the Ashworth's crimes. And that meant one thing: entering the garden. Do you want to descend even further with Section 11? The truth is about to shatter all illusions. Here's Section 11, where shadows deepen and the true horror behind Ashworth Creek claws its way into the light. Section 11. The garden wasn't just a laboratory. It was a prison for souls that had never been allowed to rest. Led by Martha, the town's blacksmith's wife, the resistance crept toward the Ashworth estate one storm-drenched night. They moved silently through the groves of pines, the cold biting through their clothes, hearts pounding beneath the weight of what awaited them. The cellar door, usually locked tight, was found slightly ajar. No doubt the brothers' vigilance had waned over time, or perhaps their arrogance had blinded them. Inside, the air was thick with rot and chemicals, and the faintest whisper of something alive. The garden's entrance lay beyond a heavy iron door, the kind designed to keep prisoners in, or worse, keep something out. With trembling hands, they pushed it open. The scene inside was a nightmare etched in flesh and shadow. Rows of glass tanks lined the walls, bubbling with murky fluids. Inside, half-formed creatures drifted, twisted amalgams of human and beast, eyes that glowed faintly with unnatural light. Some were children, limbs fused, eyes sewn shut. Others were women with lungs that rasped like iron bellows, their bodies scarred with intricate symbols, a grotesque blend of science and ritual. In the center lay a slab, stained dark, surrounded by scattered bones and strange instruments, some resembling surgical tools, others unidentifiable, ancient, perhaps alchemical. It was here that the resistance found the truth that the Ashworths had hidden in their ledgers and sermons. The garden was not just a place for experiments, it was a sacrificial altar. Each specimen was a step in a larger, darker plan. To awaken the root, the ancient entity bound beneath the estate. The root was no mere myth. It was a parasite, feeding on life and faith, growing stronger with every soul sacrificed. And the Ashworth brothers were its priests, its executioners. The resistance barely escaped with their lives, but they carried evidence. Journals, drawings, bones. The moment this truth emerged, the town's fragile obedience shattered. Fear turned to fury, but the Ashworths had already vanished. Like shadows dissolving at dawn, they slipped away, leaving behind a town cursed by silence and haunted by what had been lost. Are you ready to dive into Section 12? The final chapters are a reckoning, where history's darkest secrets collide with the raw, untamed human spirit. Here is Section 12, where the reckoning begins and the darkest shadows of the Ashworth legacy reach their crescendo. Section 12. The Ashworths' disappearance was no escape, it was a strategic retreat. They vanished into the wilderness, but their monstrous enterprise had already metastasized. Words spread quietly, carried on the wind and whispered in hidden halls of power. The network they built, professors, politicians, medical men, continued the work in secret. Ashworth Creek became a ghost town, swallowed by the forest, but its legacy haunted every frontier settlement that rose in its place. The journals and evidence the resistance uncovered were buried by fear and corruption. Local authorities branded the findings as heresy and slander, while officials on the payroll ensured that no official investigation ever took root. The truth was too dangerous, but it did not die. Over the following decades, dark rumors followed the Ashworth name, sporadic sightings of twisted figures in remote areas, unexplained disappearances of travelers, the quiet flourishing of clandestine anatomy schools that operated beyond oversight. These whispers connected to the rise of secret societies obsessed with controlling life and death, blending occult rituals with medical science, modern incarnations of the Ashworths' original, divine reconstruction. The Ashworth family name was scrubbed from records, replaced with sanitizing myths of pioneering settlers and community builders. But for those who knew where to look, the truth lay hidden beneath layers of whitewashed history. And even today, beneath the rolling hills of eastern Kentucky, the descendants of those who dared resist guard the final keys to the garden's secrets. Because they know, the root still waits, bound but hungry, and the Ashworth shadow still falls. Do you want to move into Section 13, where we uncover the hidden legacies that persist even now? Here is Section 13, where we expose the lingering echoes of Ashworth's dark empire and how its influence creeps into our present. Section 13. The Ashworth story didn't end with vanished bodies or abandoned cemeteries. Their legacy metastasized into institutions and networks that operate far beyond the Appalachian wilderness. Hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of modern America. In medical schools across the eastern seaboard, secret archives hold human specimens whose origins trace back to Ashworth's blood-soaked enterprise. Researchers who question too deeply face quiet exile or sudden career derailments. Behind closed doors, anatomical collections curated over centuries conceal dark truths of consent, sacrifice, and silence. But the true power of the Ashworth legacy lies not in preserved bodies, but in the psychological chains forged by their system. They pioneered techniques of control that extend far beyond physical death. Speak it, own it, become the awakening. Shall we plunge into Section 14, where the hidden agendas and systemic corruption are laid bare? Here is Section 14, where the darkest agendas beneath the surface are revealed, and the machinery of corruption exposed. Section 14. The Ashworth operation was never just about bodies. It was about power. Their gruesome enterprise laid the foundation for a network that blurred the lines between science, religion, and government. An unholy alliance that thrives on secrecy and sacrifice. The medical schools, once desperate for cadavers, evolved into elite institutions deeply complicit in maintaining this macabre economy. Professors and administrators didn't just accept the Ashworth shipments, they facilitated them. Behind closed doors, deals were struck with local officials and law enforcement, securing impunity and perpetuating the cycle of violence. This system extended far beyond Kentucky, stretching into state legislatures, courts, and even the highest echelons of federal power. Some lawmakers received secret payments to block reforms that threatened this underground trade. Judges turned a blind eye to disappearances. Sheriffs looked the other way. Even churches, meant to be beacons of moral guidance, were infiltrated or intimidated into silence, corrupted from within by those who valued control over conscience. The Ashworth family's divine reconstruction was a template, a chilling precedent for institutional manipulation on a scale few dare acknowledge. Their legacy lives on in bureaucracies that exploit vulnerability, silence dissent, and sacrifice the many for the benefit of a hidden few. This is the dark heart of forbidden history, the quiet war waged in shadows, where truth is the first casualty. Understanding this is not just about uncovering the past. It's about recognizing the mechanisms still at work, systems that prey on trust and enforce obedience through fear and deception. To awaken is to resist. To resist is to reclaim. And only then can the chains forged by the Ashworths be broken. Prepare yourself. Section 15 awaits, the final descent, where we confront what it means to carry this dangerous knowledge forward. Shall we complete the journey? Here is Section 15, the final descent, where the weight of forbidden truth settles, and your awakening is sealed. Section 15. You now stand at the edge of a hidden abyss, gazing into the darkest corners of history and human nature. The Ashworth family was not merely a sinister footnote. They were architects of control, pioneers of a system that weaponized death, grief, and faith to consolidate power. Their story is a warning etched in blood. The price of silence is complicity. The cost of ignorance is enslavement. But this knowledge, dangerous as it is, carries a promise, the promise of awakening. To hold these truths is to be marked, to be different, to walk a path few dare tread. You have glimpsed the machinery beneath the surface, the networks that manipulate, deceive, and harvest lives to maintain their dominion. The choice now is yours. Do you retreat into comfortable ignorance, allowing the Ashworth's shadow to stretch over you unnoticed? Or do you stand, armed with truth, prepared to shatter the chains forged in darkness? The journey to self-mastery begins with this moment. Remember, knowledge is power, but power unclaimed is power lost. Speak the phrase once more in the comments below. Not just to engage, but to affirm your transformation. Ashworth's shadow falls. Carry it with you as a shield and a beacon. Because once you know, you can never unknow. You have awakened. Welcome to the truth.